and welcome to Adventures in Local Marketing from BrightLocal, the marketing podcast for marketers who want to do good local SEO. In the upcoming episodes, I'll be chatting with a smorgasbord of marketers who each bring their unique insight into the local marketing landscape. And each episode will serve up a one-stop overview of our guest's chosen topic. And it's going to offer tips and tactics that you're going to be able to dash off and implement right away. I'm your host, I'm Claire Carlile, and I'm BrightLocal's local search expert, as well as a chartered marketer with 20 years of experience of working with local businesses of all shapes and sizes. And today we have the pleasure of chatting with George Nguyen. George is the Director of SEO Editorial at Wix. He creates content to help users and marketers better understand how search works and how to use Wix SEO tools. He was formerly a search news journalist and is known to speak at the occasional industry event. Hello, George, and welcome to the show. Hello.
Hi, Claire.
So thank you for being here today on the podcast. We are going to be talking about your experience of creating a content hub. So should we just go for it? Let's just go.
Yeah.
Let's go.
Let's do it.
Let's do my Julie Andrews Sound of Music moment, where we start at the very beginning, which is a very good place to start. Where we talk about like content hubs, or what you're referring to when I read your work as brand publications. What do we mean, and what are they, and why would an organisation or a brand want to go about creating one?
I want to disambiguate here, because when we say brand publication, technically any publication run by a brand is a brand publication. But what I mean here specifically is when we think of blogs, they generally serve the funnel. And really, it depends on what kind of business you are. If you're a B2B, it's usually a very well-defined thing. And you're creating content with very specific purpose. Sometimes there's much more emphasis on the middle to the bottom of the funnel. Considerations like that. When I talk about brand publication, I'm referring more specifically to the top of the funnel. What we do, the Wix SEO Learning Hub, for Wix is essentially provide a place for either our current existing audience of website owners or professional SEOs or aspiring SEOs to learn what it takes to become more visible online. We focus primarily on educational content for SEO, almost platform agnostic. So you'll see that we don't have CTAs all up in our content. We're not trying to get you to sign up for things. We do create content about our own products, but it's not meant to sell it to you. It's just meant to show you how to use it. That's what I mean when I talk about a brand publication, something that is there to educate your users, whether or not they become your customers, something that reflects, and this is the key component here, it's got to reflect well on your brand. It's a brand publication. There are publications out there that are great knowledge resources that the trust in those publications is high, but does that carry over? Does the goodwill carry over to the product itself? That's one of the many challenges of creating a brand publication. And it would, at some point, you can go either way there, but in a nutshell, that's what I mean. I hope that's clear, Claire.
I think that's clear. I tell you what's really useful is like some examples. Someone might be like halfway there and they're thinking, right, I think I get that, but who can we think of, or who can you sort of, aside from Wix and can you who does this really well, not necessarily in our niche, or maybe it is someone in our niche, but give some examples of organizations and brands that are doing that really well.
Yeah, so I would say that I'm really into camping lately. I'm like starting to get into it, and a lot of REI's buying guides, like even before the buying guides, like just the informational guides are really great. Tennis Warehouse, you just getting to learn about what me and my hobbies are.
Yeah, I love it.
Tennis Warehouse creates guides on like, what are different types of strings for tennis. And yeah, of course there's links there, but the information wherever you buy it doesn't matter because the information is so good. Within our niche, people listening to this might be more familiar with the Moz blog. The Moz blog I consider it to be one of the most authoritative in the space. It has such a long history, and it's so focused on best practices. How often do you see them trying to actually sell to you? Well, it's here or there. It depends on what kind of article you're in. But in general, when you land on the Moz blog, there's an expectation for quality. And I want that expectation. I want to have my own expectation quality. I want to create that for Wix. But those are two examples, one in B2B and one in B2C.
I love those. I think it's almost like every time we mention REI, because they always get a big shout out for location landing pages. They get a big shout out for the quality of the content and just being an amazing retailer. So it's quite interesting. I wonder if someone within that organization is aware of how many times people like in the digital marketing industry give them a shout out. So someone's doing really, really well. So we mentioned Wix and the content hub that you've been building around that. I'm really interested in that in terms of how long has it been around? When were you involved right from the outset of that when it was created? Did any content already exist, or did you get to start with a blank slate putting that together?
Yeah. So when you were like, oh, let's start at the beginning, I'm like, I don't really know where the beginning is. The team and I launched the SEO Learning Hub in May of 2022. But they were essentially waiting for me. I was hired at the beginning of April in 22. And essentially, I knew I was going to be running a publication, but I didn't have any idea what that timeline would be. I remember like a year before that, I had contributed to Wix and was wondering, when is my content going to go live? I had been, like in touch with them, and there was no word. As it turns out, that publication that I had contributed to sometime in late 2020 was the publication that I now run. At that time, it was more of an idea and people were getting things in place. And if you're familiar with Wix's history in terms of the SEO space, it hasn't always been as good as it is now. Let's just leave it at that, right? But in those days, there was a publication planned, and the people that were planning it were like writers and technical designers, not SEOs. That having been said, enterprise being enterprise, I didn't know what would happen to that content. Over a year had passed. And then later when I got hired, they're like, yeah, actually that content that you wrote way back is here, along with these other maybe 24 articles. And so you've been with us for 2 weeks, and you're going to launch this in 2 weeks. And that part was like, excuse me? You said I'm going to launch a publication in 2 weeks? And they're like, yes, we would really like you to do that. Everybody is waiting to have a destination to point backlinks to, and all of our marketing efforts depend on having that. And so the longer it takes, it's already taken, as you can tell, over a year, the more everything gets held down. And so feeling that pressure and also being a new hire, I was like, oh, wow. Why did we waste so much time on onboarding? Why didn't we just get to this? Why didn't you just tell me this from day one instead of like sitting through these videos and meetings? But, sometimes anybody that wants to work at an enterprise, a big enterprise, understand that these things will happen and that you should roll with it, at least to test it out. So for me, I was like, oh, I don't know if I can sustain this pace, because that 2 weeks for me was looking at a body of content that had been created by various experts, people whose names are known in the industry. However, I didn't have any process. I wasn't in the content briefs. So my ability to give feedback on this was maybe out of scope, but also in addition to that, it had just been like over a year since these drafts were submitted, and to come back to somebody and say like, hey, look, I edited, or like, can you make these changes? It's just not very professional. So I had to triage what I could from that initial batch of content, the more evergreen content. I spent those 2 weeks updating all of it, making it relevant, getting it up to our standard, publishing them. The SEO Learning Hub had actually been online before I was hired. It was just not indexed, and for good reason. I don't know why they had it online, but essentially we allowed it to get indexed, and that was the launch. I felt a brief reprieve, like, oh, wow, the sprint is done, working those 12-hour days, almost 7 days a week for that period. That's done. Things are going to get better. But then like it shifted from having to create something out of this mess of documents that I was handed and then turn that into actual workflows and something that goes into the future. That part, if you're listening and you are creating a brand publication, if you're in-house or you're at an agency doing this for the first time, I really recommend taking it as slow as you can, right? Get that initial batch at launch, but make sure that your cadence in the first few months is geared more towards long-term sustainability and setting up workflows and having room to fail or for things to take a long time. Like, you don't understand. People go on vacations for summer, but your writers, they really go on vacation for summer, right? And so planning out your publishing cadence with regard to that will set you up for better cadence in the long term. And that's something that I was fortunate in that I was really adamant that I cannot work in a way in which I'm like setting up a publication in 2 weeks' time. It needs to be proper, it needs to be done right. We need to be an example of good SEO, not rushed decision making. And so that was heard, and I got to onboard people whose writing I had been following for years in the industry across various content categories like local. You're one of the SEO Hub content contributors, Claire.
Yay!
But yeah, that's pretty much how that got going. And now it's just trying to figure out how to align the current audience with where the product wants to go and also what my audience needs. The longer you do this, the more you realize, like, once the initial brand lift happens, because the SEO Learning Hub's not new anymore, we are something of a known name. We appear in the major newsletters and things like that. Obviously, the hype isn't as much, but how do you keep up that quality? How do you make sure that it still does something for the brand? It isn't just an educational publication that people go to, but they don't care for the product at all, or they don't even know what's happening with the product. And so that's kind of the challenge we're at now.
Many parts of that sort of started my brain whirring. But the first is the massive turnaround in terms of the robustness of Wix as a platform. And some people are still catching up because, I use Wix. I built in Wix. It's really robust for the things that I need it to do. And then, so coming full circle and going, yeah, this is a robust product that I can use, but some people are still catching up with that, especially the types of people that I speak about that I want to build them a website in. And then the fact that there is this awesome content really by industry leaders. Does it have to be a leader? People that are well respected from within the industry and that really know their stuff. And I think it must have been quite interesting inheriting a certain number of pieces of content that you had to retrospectively go into and apply your editorial magic, because in my experience, you are a very good editor. You're quite strict, which is good. We like that. So that must have been quite, here are some pieces, they need publishing, it needs to be great, but you haven't been involved in the framework or any of the guidelines in the content. So that must have been good times for you, I believe, George.
In terms of our contributors, I think of them as experts and future experts when I'm selecting and I'm onboarding. That's the way I think about that. But yeah, it feels kind of like you're stepping into, somebody else's world. And also sometimes it can be really bad, especially if you have standards and you have timelines. Those things are almost always going to conflict, but you have to kind of contextualize, what is the mission here? For me, the mission is to get something up that it will represent the brand well enough for now. I will do the rest later, but what it needs to do today is be a viable place for me to approach new contributors. Because at that point, I was like, I don't really know half the people here that contributed previously, and I don't I had feelings about some of their content. Maybe I didn't want to have a writer that wrote with a really big emphasis on passive voice, and so you have to have something respectable to begin with. But then as time goes on, like there's always more publishing. That's sort of the beauty and the curse of publishing. You know, some people have big sprints and they do things and then there's a brief time off. Like, guess what? I get another article. Next week, there's either 1 or 2 articles coming out in perpetuity for as long as the publication exists. So even if you mess up on something or something isn't as you would like, and I hear from people like, hey, this content, this like really old one's not that good, right? And I'm like, yeah, I will update it, right? You can always go back. You can always change what things look like, but sometimes there's no getting around a stakeholder need.
No. And sometimes it can be iterative. So on that subject, thinking about contributors, I was reading a piece from you today, actually, talking about in-house editorial and working with contributors, and sometimes organizations that are working on a brand publication are going to need to make the choice between or what they're going to do, or is it going to be a hybrid or whatever. Can you tell us a bit about those options? What might work for people? What are the opportunities? What are the challenges of those two different approaches?
So I think that let's take it from the local context before I kind of dive into my more, like, I guess, experience-based takes. The local context here should be like, if you're the face of your business, if I'm like George, the engineer or the electrician, right? The content's got to come from the person doing the job or who is knowledgeable about it. So chances are that's boots on the ground. But if you have a multi-location business, you suddenly have a lot more leeway. Probably have a lot more staff that you can leverage, which is the best thing you want to do. You don't want to take somebody who's maybe like a really high value worker, somebody that like works in HVAC for enterprises that you send around, right? That probably bills thousands of dollars an hour. You may not want to take them off that job to write expert level content for you. But that's something that you have to decide, because that's a marketing decision. And also, like, sometimes people just want the break, and it depends on the industry you're in. If it's an industry that never changes, then you don't really have as much to cover in your content. It's more about keeping it up to date and reflecting the state of affairs today. But that's an interesting. I always advocate for people who actually do the work to create the content. Okay, so internal versus external writers. When you have an internal writer, generally that person is a writer. They will be trained, hopefully, on content marketing best practices, SEO best practices, and they're going to write with considerations on how to rank well. Is that the primary thing that you should be doing? It kind of depends on your niche, and you really have to look at that. But when I think about internal writers, the advantages here are they're generally more trainable, because if they aren't, then they're not going to keep the job for very long. Just like if I wasn't trainable by my boss, I wouldn't keep my job for very long. So that malleability, that level of control might be super important, especially in industries that are heavily regulated, where you have lawyers coming in to read the copy and you need to make everyone's job easier. And there's 4 steps of approval before publishing. And you need that cog to just be a cog that works well all the time. Internal writers are hard to beat. There's a different standard that you can expect from them as well. If you want them to stick strictly to your guidelines, you can do that. With external writers, you kind of have to, hope, wish, and pray. Did you read my guidelines? If you did you understand them properly? Did you remember them when you wrote them? There's a lot of cleanup involved if you're using external writers primarily. Internal writers are also likely going to be more expensive. That's a full-time salary, or at least a part-time salary, or several part-time salaries. But again, more control. For external writers, and this is why I advocate for practitioners to write, is Google's concept of experience, expertise, authoritativeness, trustworthiness. That acronym has gotten so long.
EAT.
EAT. Yeah. But let's put the acronym aside, because I don't want to focus too much on like what Google labels things, and just realize of course your consumers, your buyers, trust somebody who actually is doing the work, right? And there's nothing will ever make that different. Like how much SEO do I do? I do SEO on my own publication. Do I do any technical SEO? No. Did I write about Core Web Vitals? Yes. Should you trust it? Yes, because it's researched. Should you trust it more than somebody who actually does it and does the research? No. And that will always kind of be the problem with me as an internal writer, right? But if you get somebody like Jamie Indigo, who is one of our contributors, she's an excellent technical SEO, right? Then I don't have to make that compromise. Also, editors and marketers, most of us, like at least in the content market, not all of us are loud people. You need that loudness to generate the brand lift. That's why so many of my contributors are conference speakers. They have a big following on various social platforms. They're well known, even some of them outside of SEO and just digital marketing at large. And they also work for companies, agencies that can help us promote their content, shine a light on it. You need to pull in all those efforts in certain industries, especially if you're coming from not a very good space reputation-wise, which Wix was not. And so for me, it became obvious what I had to do, and I had to go the external way. But of course, it's not all like it's not just that you get the EEAT, that you get their expertise, and then it's cheaper and all that stuff. There's trickiness to it. Like I said, you don't get to make the same demands. You're working to their timelines. And you are also realizing that in many industries, you're never paying as much as if they just went out and did the job. That's the difference here is why would somebody who is a digital marketer who makes, let's say, hundreds of, let's say just $200 an hour, right? That's a lot for some people. That's not a lot for some other people. And you're going to pay them maybe like $500 for an article that takes them 6 hours to write. Like that's a thing there that's kind of tricky, right? You have to have sometimes something else. And for us, you're working with a really big brand in the space, Wix. What do you have for your company? What is your position that you can give them? Because if it's not straight budget or promotion, then what do you have that they want? And so I think once you look at those and you kind of figure out where you are in this Venn diagram, that choice becomes really apparent. If you have the opportunity to do both, you absolutely should do both.
It's like you're saying, it's an iterative process. It's not one and done. What resonates, what is working the best for you, what gets shared the most, what has, what gets amplified the most. You can try different approaches, can't you, and see what gets the best return for you. Do you have in-house? Would you consider yourself the in-house writer then at Wix?
For SEO, the dedicated if there was going to be one person that was a dedicated writer,
yeah,
I would say by a hair, it's me. Because my primary duty is not to write content for the hub, but it just so happens that, it's my publication. I should probably lead by example. Also, our team works in kind of a tripod. There are more members to it. And nothing that we do would be possible without the SEO product team who actually develops the products that make Wix's reputation what it is now. Without that, the SEO Learning Hub is meaningless. If you have a terrible product and you have a brand publication that's really good, then guess what? You just have a brand publication that's working for the general good, which as an educator I really like, but also kind of feels like, oh, how long are you going to be able to keep that? If the product isn't relevant, guess what? This blog is probably not going to be around for very long. Because at some point, resources are going to get pulled. You're not doing anything for us because you can't, because the product isn't good enough. But because our product team has gotten a lot better, yeah, it's all that. But Crystal and Morty also write. It is more about availability than it is about anything else. And some topics will clearly be in one person's lane over the other. Like technical SEO is like Crystal. Anything that you really need to be into the nitty gritty about SEO, that's Crystal. Morty is great at the future, forecasting, seeing the direction that Google's headed in. And for me, I'm I guess I just create content. I don't know. It's hard for me to describe the way I go about it. I just research and then I feel like I create what should be created, but I can see their skills very well. And then I don't think about my skills very much. I'm just kind of all right, this is what needs to get done. And I hope the audience likes it.
Yeah, well,
we have internal writers.
We know they do like it because coming round to the piece that you wrote on the BrightLocal blog about diversifying brand, so diversity basically in brand publications, why you should do it, where to get started. So for anyone that hasn't read that piece, which they should do, but after they're finished listening to this, they should go and read it, and we'll include the link to that in the show notes. Can you give us a quick overview of how you seek out and maintain diversity on your own brand publication?
Okay, so in terms of seeking out diversity, I think that initially that first year was a lot more difficult because we were starting out with an existing pool of contributors, but they were hub contributors. They were inherited to me, so I didn't have relationships with most of them, and asking for referrals only gets you, it feels like it only gets you so far. That's the first place I started, right? Asking for referrals and looking within my own community. I'm a person of color. And when I talk about brand diversity, I don't specifically mean ethnic diversity, right? There's neurodiversity. There's all sorts of diversity. And as I learn more about that diversity, I try to find ways to reflect it in our contributorship. But speaking purely as a person of color, I tried to, as much as I could, leverage my own network of people of color who were already experts, that were established, and could string together coherent thoughts. That was a really important thing. I will work with a lot of contributors to develop them if I think that at their core, they got something there, something special, an ability to explain or a special type of insight or knowledge, right? At first, it was a lot of that. Crystal also, she knows a lot of people, and that was a big thing. It was important to us both. If it was only important to me, if brand diversity in your publication is only important to one person, it's probably not going to happen.
Yeah, it's not important then, really.
Yeah, it's a personal mission, and one that won't always reflect well on you because you obviously didn't get the buy-in to begin with. I've had a few bosses here at Wix, and I've made it very obvious that this is a big incentive for me to be on this publication, because previously I was at Search Engine Land, and looking at the landscape, I didn't see many publishers that were people of color, and I didn't see many contributors that were people of color, which was an initial difficulty. But as you start to make your way through your niche and start publishing, you start discovering forces in the industry. These forces are communities. You know, because sometimes you inadvertently tap into them, or, you know, you might piss them off, which I've seen happen before. I've seen, you know, at a publication, somebody wrote something and it failed to properly cite the original study, and that person was in Women in Tech SEO, and practically the whole group was really upset. And so that you feel the power of the community there. For me, I if I need somebody to improve diversity, which we track through people who self-identify on social media via their profiles and such, we have a loose tracking of diversity that we keep an eye on. We review about once a quarter, and then we try to, it takes a long time to course correct. Moving anything in enterprise is like steering like a cruise ship. So we have to anticipate these problems ahead of time, but really keeping an eye on that, actually having metrics and like a meeting accountable. And then even looking at your landing page and your author profiles in the last, like whatever, if 6 appear on your top of the fold, and looking at those authors and be like, if someone stepped into it now, would they assume this diversity is throughout, or would they assume this is a homogenous blog like many of the other ones? It depends on what your industry is. Obviously, B2B kind of a little bit harder to do. And also, people don't feel like it's as important. Think about diversity here for a second and wonder, is it less important because the company is B2B? Like inherently, that seems like a ridiculous question, but let me pivot. Like if that doesn't get you to believe in the value there, think about what you're able to offer your contributors. Yes, we pay our contributors, but some of these agency owners, we pay nothing near their day rate, for sure. How could we, right? But to be able to say, look, this is the publication we've built, and over the last 2 years running, we've been the most diverse publication in terms of BIPOC diversity, according to the FCDC study. We've been one of the top male-female contribution in terms of contribution ratio, according to another study by Lydia Infante. To be able to say that and say, we want you to be a part of this thing, you know, people can feel good about that. it adds to the benefit. They think that they're doing good in the world. And I feel like I'm doing good in the world because I get to, see the faces that I didn't get to see when I was younger in the industry. That kind of stuff really affected me because I didn't know how much of myself I could be. And coming out of my shell has been a very slow, long process filled with a lot of insecurities. If you can do that for other people, I know that my experts believe in that. And so that's another reason why we do it. It's not just about like the optics of it externally, but who our contributor audience is. But yeah, tap into those communities. They're everywhere for every industry, every employee, there's employee resource groups. Look at that. I'm not going to give away the whole article essentially, but that's the way I go about it. I get in touch with community leaders to help me identify upcoming talent.
Yeah. And it works brilliantly because they are out there, the number of diverse groups that are, represented at places like Brighton SEO, like the neurodiversity in SEO group. There are so many interesting, diverse groups where you can tap into and you can meet people. I don't know if it's just our industry that, I don't know, because I only speak to people in our industry, and then I just think, is any of this stuff happening outside of our industry? I don't know, but
it's got to be happening because everyone wants to make money, right? Okay. Everybody wants to make money. Nobody wants to feel alone. Mm-hmm. If you've ever talked to Arij Abouali about how close she came to quitting her SEO career before she founded Women in Tech SEO, even for me, I created an Asians in Search Slack community that's by referral. And that was because when I was laid off in 2018, it was like the loneliest time in my life, I feel. And I didn't want anyone else to feel that, right? That's a powerful thing to rally around. And if you can tap into that and say, hey, I have something to offer, I can get you published. I have a platform for you. And this is the values of the platform. There's no reason not to do that.
Okay, George, because you are so lovely, you haven't really moaned about anything yet, which is normally my segue into doing Room 404, where I like to give our guests the chance to take a marketing or an SEO concept that they would like to see the back of. They want to drop kick some concept into, I don't know, into the future where it's never seen again. And I wondered, what would you like to pop into Room 404 today?
I have some answers for this, but I'm gonna roll back and at first say I don't ever want to sound ungrateful for the opportunities. The bottom line is I have a lot of opportunities to represent Wix or even in previous employers to be at conferences. And there's an amount of us in the industry that have to do that, right? Claire, you're one of them. We show up in person, we do these things. I just want to recognize all the introverts out there. And, it's not that easy. And it seems like more taxing physically sometimes. For me, I do about 6 trips a year, and let's just try not to be cynical about that, because these are the opportunities that you'll always look back on. And you'll be like, oh, that played a part in my career. And you never want to disparage them because they could really go for other people, to other people, right? And so that's more of a message for me, I guess, to not get salty about doing the in-person work and things like that, because serving the community when I'm there is great. It's just being away from my family is difficult. And I know a lot of people feel that. But yeah, SEO juice is a term I absolutely hate. I wish people would stop using that. It sounds vulgar to me. It also super oversimplifies and reduces the concept of how backlinks work or how SEO works. I feel like that's an easy answer. I know I've heard some people say oh, I hope it never goes away. I love saying that. I'm like, why?
Who? But we won't name anyone, obviously.
I don't even remember. I an interaction like that, I'm just out of my, I think the real thing though is I would like to see this convergence between what Google has told us through its representatives over the years in an official capacity and what we have come to learn in an unofficial capacity or through the API leaks from a few months ago, or from former Googlers who have quit and talked. There's a lot of different information that says so many different things. And when I first started in SEO, it felt like the environment was that you could really trust what a Google search advocate had to say about the algorithm, how it worked, how ranking worked, JavaScript, things like that. We get the API leaks and we find that there are these like engagement factors, for example, that we don't know about. Sure, there's other factors that we didn't know about, but nobody asked Google about those factors, or to my knowledge, right? So there's not a need to publicly lie. But now that we have this information, of course, a company can always backtrack and say, oh, that's not in the algorithm anymore, and there's no way to verify that. But at least address that there's a difference between what we knew, what was put out officially, and what we have come to learn. I think that in this environment, with the legislation that Google's under, especially here in America, and what we owe to our clients, well, we should be able to better articulate what works. We're always talking about what works for us, and at one point we could say what worked for Google and what Google tells us, but that credibility is not the same at this point. And I would like to see Google come back and address that in a way that that we could all have a lot more confidence in what they're saying and their guidance moving forward. I think that would be huge, especially because, I mean, third-party cookies, I've been under the impression they were going to go away for like 3-4 years. I've written so many articles about it when I was writing in PPC marketing and news, but then I'm like out of that space now and I hear, oh, they're not going away. Well, we just wasted so much time preparing for this. And of course, the guidance is still the same. You can argue that you shouldn't be dependent on one channel anyway. And that's true. But you could have been more forthright with your decision making so that people can make that decision for themselves at the very least, instead of making decisions out of fear or in like potentially saying that third-party cookies are going to go away means that agencies are going to act a certain way, which means they're going to steer their clients a certain way. Is that better for their outcomes? Now we're involving decision-making and biases and revenue and things like that on kind of claims that might have been true at the time, but hey, now they're not just because. Why? And that's an oversimplification of legislation, privacy, what have you. I've just condensed so many topics into this little gripe. But I think that's what Room 404
is for. That's okay. We'll take it. The legislation and the privacy, it would seem that Google, should be a lot more opaque on those parts, surely. Whereas the other parts, which is just like, well, what's important? What's part of your algorithm? What's a ranking factor? As SEOs and marketers, we're always going to be trying to understand that, but backtracking, like you say, something as important as the cookies situation, it just you sort of throw your hands up in dismay at those things. Obviously, we just wish that everyone could communicate more fairly, honestly, and openly. I can't magic that to happen for you, but I can actually make the official decision to put link juice and SEO magic, sprinkling SEO magic, can officially go into Room 404. We'll never hear that phrase again. It's gone. I hope you're happy about that, George.
Oh, feels so good. It feels like a cleaner industry already.
Yeah, SEO juice, goodbye. Link juice, goodbye. SEO content, goodbye. It's all gone, and the world is a happier place. Hooray! I am going to ask you, we're so happy, we're doing a happy dance. I'm going to ask you about other, when we think about, content hubs, all the things that we've been talking about today, we think a lot about articles. Well, I do. I often think about articles. Is there a place for other types of content, and does it live in that brand publication hub that you're creating? What do you... Is it an it depends, or what else could live in there happily?
I mean, you could take the spray and pray approach. I see a lot of companies, especially in B2C, do that, where they everywhere that potential customer can be, they will be. And for B2C, where you're like, I'll take all the retail dollars I can get, that might be the right play. For us, our audience was, kind of the captive Wix audience of like 200 million plus website owners, but also SMBs that weren't on our platform, and agencies and enterprises that aren't on our platform. Let's talk about that more advanced group of people, right? That's the one that we're looking at more, that need more convincing that we're actually experts in SEO and what we're talking about here. For us, we know that newsletters and podcasts have been popular in this space. And they're also a way to connect us with experts in the industry through quotes and through appearances, and pretty much what we're doing right here for Adventures in Local Marketing, right? If you know that's what your audience wants, then you kind of have to figure out, well, is it a main content channel or is it a distribution channel? How do you get all these cogs to work in the same way? At Wix, we have the Serps Up podcast, which is once a week. We have our 100th episode coming up. It might already be out by the time this is out. And we have our monthly webinars. And then we have article content that happens 6 times a month. And those are our main things that we focus on. We also have a resource center. Those resource center is kind of a play at, B2B business templates. What do people need to track their backlink profile, right? Creating those resources for them. That's something that I wouldn't have imagined in a different setting that wasn't B2B, right? So figuring out your content formats is a huge deal. That having been said, do not underestimate what one more channel means. Is it a main content channel or is it a distribution channel? Define the role, what is leading the ship here. And then you can plan around that. But don't just start doing things because you think it's gonna work. Like, make sure that, especially if you're on limited resources, right? It takes a lot to get the podcast out every week. We work with Edge of the Web to record our podcasts. We coordinate with guests. For me, there's a ton of coordination in article content. Every single article is written by someone. That's a different workflow. I tailor my workflow for the contributor because I want to get the best out of them and I want to maintain a long relationship. But that's how my publication works, right? And then webinars, you're also booking guests. You're handling things internally. You're dealing with the platform and promotion. Nothing exists in a vacuum. Start small, and hopefully you'll start gaining some traction. You can test out channels. You don't have to start with like, oh, we're going to launch with this many TikTok videos. Just get started and see what the reaction is like, and then move on from there. But of course, if you're an established brand, you got all the money in the world, then the sort of, world's your oyster, which is kind of what it felt like for me when I first started here. I was like, oh, I have budget. I can do content. Let's see. But of course, as the publication advances or your content advances, the number of topics you've covered has grown, and factoring that what exists and what needs to now exist becomes part of becoming more sophisticated, and that's what makes an editor or a strategist experienced.
Yeah, for sure. And also factoring in the fact that your content is it needs to be updated, especially in the industry that we're in. You write something and then the next year the processes have changed, or the tool has been removed, or it doesn't work anymore.
Google key events. It's not conversions, It's key events. It's not Google My Business, it's Google Business Profile. It's not Data Studio, it's Looker Studio.
No. So
those
even
are
just
the Google
up,
ones. Yeah.
That's just the naming. That's just naming.
Yeah.
That's not, yeah. So we mustn't forget that bit. So we're coming up, sadly, to the end of our time here. Although I could talk about, I could just talk with you all day, George. We should do an extended, 24-hour sponsored podcast. I'm sure everyone would tune in for that. This is your chance to have a chat. You nodding? Yes, you would love to join in with that. This is your chance to
amount of trolling. The amount of trolling that would occur. Just I don't think I could take that.
Well, 8
Between
hours
your personality and your friends in the industry and my friends in the industry.
8 hours of it would be sleeping with white noise on in the background, so it's absolutely fine. We would love to hear your local marketer shout out. So for anyone that might be talking, anything to say about local marketing, it might be content hubs, it could be all sorts of things. Who are you following, reading, and who should our listeners and watchers be following and reading?
I have to give a shout out to all of my local SEO experts that contribute to the SEO Learning Camp, because I realize I don't shout out enough of my own experts and the work that they put in. Claire, obviously. Crystal Tang, Miriam Ellis, Celeste Gonzalez, Darren Shaw. It feels like I've had a few years of relationships with all of these people. It's been wonderful. So I try my best to follow what they're doing. Darren does some really interesting videos on X. That's usually where I see them. So yeah, definitely follow those people. Greg Sterling, Mike Blumenthal, and I'm missing some. I think another person is part of Near Media.
David Mim.
Near Media, right? Those three are the owners of Near Media. Their newsletter comes out, I think, daily. Sometimes I feel like it's more than once a day. Yeah, it's daily. Sometimes it feels like more than once a day. I don't always get to read it, but when I think about trust and local SEO content, it's hard to imagine trusting anyone more than these individuals. Definitely subscribe to the Near Media newsletter if you're a local SEO. Full endorsement there. And I wanted to shout out, since we're like, this is local. Is it local? Am I reaching? It's okay if I'm reaching, right?
No, it's
We're doing
fine.
local events.
It is local. I listen. Yeah.
We're doing local events in New York City at the Wix Playground. They happen about every other month. I know the next one is in September with Sterling Sky, and that's already fully RSVP'd out. We don't really have our schedule moving forward from there, but keep an eye out. You can follow me or Morty or Crystal. And as we start putting events together, I want my office, the Wix Playground, to be the unofficial home of SEO in Manhattan. And we've had 3 wonderful events there with a lot of great experts. It's just nice to feel like, SEO is here. It's back in New York, and it's intimate. It's not like a full conference hall. But yeah, those are my shout outs.
I love those. That sounds like a great event. I think we should all go to New York for that one. And you, if anyone wants to follow you, George, are you still active? Where are you active? Where can people contact you and get to know you?
I am on X/Twitter. My handle is GEOCHINGU. It's just the first 3 letters of my first, middle, and last name. And I'm also on LinkedIn, but if you don't actually say something in your invite request, I don't approve it. Because I'm like, I want to know you. Especially because there's so many spammers in the industry, right? I don't want to open my door to spammers. Nobody likes those email notifications, right? So just say I heard of you from somebody, or I saw you here, right? And I'll be like, all right, cool. Great to meet you.
Yeah, so yeah, definitely. Same. You'd want someone to at least say why they're wanting to connect with you beyond trying to sell you something, which is what you get quite a lot on LinkedIn. So I need to say a big thank you to you, George, for today and coming and sharing all of your stories of the setting up the Wix Hub and all of these nuggets of knowledge that you have shared.
Thank you. I feel like when we talk about these things ahead of time, we plan the podcast, and I'm always talking to BrightLocal, I don't know what to say. I don't. And then whatever it ends up being, I'm like, oh, okay, this article that I wrote for you is 4,000 words, or, oh, this podcast is going over on time. I'm like, oh, I'm verbose. And that's discovering something about myself.
No,
but I appreciate the opportunity.
I don't agree with that at all. I think you are succinct and interesting, and you have a lot of knowledge. So I want to say a big thank you, obviously, for sharing that with us today. And of course, a big thank you to all of our listeners and our watchers. And so that's it for today. We'll make sure that we include all of the links that we talked about today in the show notes. So make sure that you check them out and follow up, and you can learn more. And if you've enjoyed listening to Adventures in Local Marketing, then please leave us a review, because it does actually help. So leave that on your platform listening podcast of choice. Share it with a friend, listen with a friend, because it makes a big difference and allows us to make even more valuable content for you. And if you, dear listeners and watchers, have got some ideas about guests that you'd like to hear from, or topics that you would like covered, then let us know. And in the next few months, I'm going to be speaking with, we've already mentioned, the lovely Arij, and I'm also going to be speaking with Dana Lucio. So make sure you subscribe so you can listen to those interviews where they come out. And that's it for today. See you next time on Adventures in Local Marketing. I'm looking forward to it already.